A new poll by Pew Research shows Americans are more frustrated with corporations and the wealthy not paying their fair share than they are with the amount in taxes that they themselves pay.
So, Democratic strategist, owner of JC Strategies, Jennifer Holdsworth-Karp, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard. They join us now to discuss. Rachel, what do you make of this polling? I find it really interesting. Something else we covered in the show this week is about younger Republicans dramatically differ from older Republicans in terms of whether they're willing to deficit spend whenever it comes to infrastructure, the dividing line being age of 45. So what do you make of, this in that context too?
The generational divide in the Republican Party on fiscal issues is fascinating to me. Mm-hmm. And I think you're really starting to see it with how corporations are treated in the tax code in particular. Because if you think about sort of the older generation of Republicans that came of age sort of before the waves of globalization in the 80s and the 90s, they were people that in many cases, lived in the communities with the CEO that ran the company in their town, the biggest company in their town. And that's that was, du jour for them. Bring in NAFTA, bring in all this massive globalization. Right. You now have these like multinational, huge corporations that, the CEOs live on the coasts, meanwhile performing tax arbitrage, right, in various like tax havens throughout the world. It's a totally, totally different issue. And so I think that, the generational divide is one where, they saw them as sort of community players, job creators versus now where we sort of see our corporate CEOs as these, oligarch titans, escaping any sort of corporate social government responsibility. And so there's more people in the Republican Party that are younger that are willing to say no. Like, we need to fix this issue. Corporations do need to, be more responsible and contribute to sort of the general social fabric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting, Jen, if you look, and we can throw these numbers back up on the screen here for a minute. If you look, the idea that some corporations and some wealthy people don't pay their fair share is like overwhelmingly shared by the vast majority of the public, and that would have to include majorities of Democrats and Republicans, just looking at the numbers here. But then on the bottom, and I think you can't see it on the screen, they asked this idea that some poor people don't pay their fair share, which is taking me back to like Mitt Romney and the previous Fox News talking points. This used to be a regular talking point on Fox News of like, oh, well, you're so worried about the wealthy. Well, they pay most of the taxes, the poor that don't pay any income taxes at all, and they're just freeloaders. Mitt Romney's whole famous like 47% of Americans, they're just taking and they're mooching and you're never going to be able to reach them. So it does show a pretty dramatic shift in how people are thinking about these questions of taxation and equity within the tax code.
Yeah, I think that we've also let the economic conversation become kind of a meme. There's this old joke that, there's 10 cookies and the rich person takes 9 cookies. And then the rich person tells the middle class person, hey, that poor person's trying to take the last cookie, right? That is exactly what is going on in the American economy right now. There's different definitions of wealth across the country. And if you talk about cost of living and indexing, it's kind of the third rail. But you also have to talk about services that are available to folks around the country, depending not only on what income bracket you're in, but what your tax burden is in. There are certain states that are donor states to the national coffers who receive very little back for their tax burden. Why is that? Because it is going to states who refuse to tax corporations in the way that they should. The problem in America is that we tax higher earners and we keep Americans in a caste system by that tax bracket. So if you're earning $55,000 a year, you think that somebody earning $100,000 a year is wealthy. If you're earning $100,000 a year, you think somebody earning $200,000 is wealthy. Meanwhile, somebody making over $10 million a year and $100 million a year is laughing all the way to the bank because they are experts in tax avoidance and are essentially paying no taxes right along with the corporations that they own. So the real conversation that America should be having, and I think this is generational both on the left and the right, is saying companies in America have gotten away for far too long with absolute murder when it comes to the tax structure. But I think we need to be careful because one of the things that is constantly put on Democrats' back in elections is why are you killing small businesses with your tax conversation? We need to be much more strong in our rhetoric about we are talking about mega corporations getting away with it, not mom and pop businesses on Main Street. They should be protected by the tax structure too. And right now they are not.
Right. And Rachel, it's interesting. I'm curious. I know the corporate conversation is shifting. Do you think it will shift on wealthy individuals? Because I was just looking, Robert Rubin, he's a great tax reporter at the Wall Street Journal, he tweeted out this table. I mean, for people who in the 90th percentile and more of income, only half of them, even in the 90th percentile, make most of their money through wages. Almost the rest of it, it's just unbelievable. It's like pass-through taxes or whatever. Pass-through deduction, 28% amongst the top 0.01%. Corporate is 28% as well. Interest alone. And then other is another 16. Dividend income and a lot of other stuff. Only 20% of their wages of their income come from wages, whereas 100% nearly for people who are in the bottom 50. So do you think the conversation on that is going to change? Because look, you can tax the hell out of a corporation as much as you want. That's actually not where all the money is. A lot of it is just with extraordinarily high net worth individuals.
I think it's growing a little slower on the Republican side. And it's interesting. There was a paper that came out, I think it was last year, from Harvard University, which discussed sort of the differences in how Republicans and Democrats actually view taxes psychologically. And I think it informs a lot of this debate because Republicans, the term fairness for them means keeping what you earn. The term fairness for a lot of Democrats means paying for what you enjoy. And so I think it's a little bit harder for Republicans to get over the threshold of, if someone has been successful, to really go after that individual. I think, to your point, the tide has definitely shifted on corporations, where before we were like, no, these are the job creators. Yeah. We're like, no, these are like the woke soldiers trying to change society, and deprive it of its wealth. It's a little bit of a different case, I think, on the Republican side for individuals. But, that may be changing. The fiscal landscape on the right is shifting dramatically. So, I don't want to make too many predictions because it is a shifting tectonic plate.
It's a good point.
Yeah, there was fascinating polling. I keep bringing it up here on billionaires, in the way that Democrats viewed billionaires and the way Republicans viewed billionaires. And it was very much Democrats had actually more favorable opinions of individual billionaires. You ask them about Bill Gates, they're like, I freaking love Bill Gates. That guy's amazing. But then you ask them overall, like, should billionaires be taxed? You ask them the policy questions, and they're like, absolutely. Republicans were the polar opposite. They had a lot of skepticism about every single individual billionaire, except I think Elon Musk. But on the policy questions, they were, like Rachel said, they were like, no, people should keep what they earn, and basically like they deserve to have this much money. So there is a very different way in thinking about it, I think, between Republicans and Democrats. But I will say the one place of bipartisan agreement was that people thought it was profoundly unfair, the amount of billions that these billionaires continue to rack up during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that some part of the conversation is lost too, because when a lot of Democrats talk about billionaires, especially centrist Democrats, they always say, we have no problem with people earning, as much as they can, but we think that there needs to be a floor. There's a little bit of truth to both sides of that conversation. It's okay if you're earning as much as you possibly can in a fair way, but what does that mean? That you're not depriving your own workers of not just a living wage, but a fair wage, right? Something that if you're stealing away into the night with billions and billions of dollars like the Waltons used to, and yet your employees are on government assistance, there's no sense of fairness in that. So we need to close that gap. But on the other side, I think you see people saying now, you know what, in an economy where so many people still are struggling, to allow that type of income to any one individual is obscene. And I think you're even seeing the right, in terms of generational split, move more and more to that argument.
Yeah, I keep making this point. The way you make $1 billion in America is not through founding a great company. It's through being a good hedge fund manager. Doesn't sound realistic to me, but so be it. Okay, so thanks, guys. We really appreciate it.
Great to see you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And more rising for you after this.